All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for the third workshop for proposed amendments to District Rules 1020, our definitions rule, District Rule 2201, our new and modified stationary source review rule, and District Rule 2301, our emission reduction credit banking rules. My name is Errol Villegas. I am a permit services manager here in the Central Region office. To my left, I have Brian Clerico, a supervising air quality engineer, and to his left, I have Jesse Garcia, a senior air quality engineer. This meeting is kind of a hybrid meeting. It's going to be held via Zoom video teleconference. We do have our offices open, and hopefully people will take the opportunity to attend in person. This meeting is also being recorded, and we'll do our best to help facilitate a smooth workshop. Before I begin, I wanted to go over some housekeeping and general information instructions for the meeting. First off, if you can please silence any of your communication devices, such as your cell phone, or if you're at your desk or at home watching via Zoom, your desk phones. This will ensure that we're not hearing any feedback and minimize the interruptions associated with any phone calls. Throughout the presentation, we'll open up the opportunities to receive public comments. And then also we'll have a formal commenting period at the end of the presentation for comments or questions. But again, throughout the presentation, if you do have any questions or comments at any point, go ahead and please make yourself known, and we'll do our best to try to answer those questions at that time. If you do have any comments, before you make your comment, please state your name and your affiliation so we know, again, who is making the comment and who you're representing. For members of the public that are participating via the Zoom application, please raise your hand using the raise hand function so you may be recognized to speak. For those participating via the teleconference on their phones, please press *9 to raise your hand to be recognized. Staff will call out the last 4 digits of your phone number when it's your turn to speak, and then be sure to press *6 to mute or unmute yourself if you need to. And then for those who are attending in person, please approach the associated podium, whichever region you have to be, that you happen to be located in, so that you can make your comments and be heard. You may also send comments or questions via email using our email address of webcast@valleyair.org. We'll have that on the on the presentation slides. Again, webcast@valleyair.org. I will be monitoring that email inbox and will respond to any comments or questions received through that media. We also have documents available for those in person outside the various governing board rooms or VTC rooms. And then the documents are also available online where the workshop page is located. We have the draft rules for review and comment at this point in time. That said, I will go ahead and pass the microphone to Jesse Garcia to start our presentation.
All right. Hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Jesse Garcia, as you mentioned, Senior Air Quality Engineer here in the Permit Services Department. We're going to be talking and discussing the proposed amendments to Rules 1020, Rule 2201, and Rule 2301. And we're going to jump right into it. First, I'd like to start off with a little background on how we got to where we are today and what has already been accomplished. Going back to January of 2019, the CARB board directed their staff to review the district's ERC program. And during the process, the district has worked with CARB staff to aid in the understanding of the district's ERC system and permitting program and provide requested information. And then in June 2020, CARB released its final report of the review of the district emission reduction credit system. During CARB's review and since then, the district has been working to address offset equivalency issues with the public advisory work group that was formed. In April of 2022, the district kicked off the rule amendment process with a public scoping meeting. And then the first public workshop to present and discuss some proposed rule language amendments was held in June of 2022. Additionally, in July, EPA proposed a limited approval disapproval of the 2019 version of Rule 2201. And then in October of last year, the district hosted the second public workshop in which we presented additional information and proposed rule language for Rules 2201 and 2301. In today's presentation of the principal amendments proposed for Rule 2201, we will be covering the background of new source review, or NSR, EPA's comments on the district's 2019 version of Rule 2201, the multi-path approach, which consists of adopting the federal offsetting requirements for NOx and VOC while maintaining a federal offset equivalency system for PM10, PM2.5, SOx, and CO. The public noticing for minor sources, and routine replacement emissions unit provisions and clarifications. To give some background on new source review, the district implements a permitting program that is designed under state law to ensure on a regional basis there is no net increase in emissions for new or modified sources. And what that means is that as we see new facilities come into the valley or modifications of existing ones, we are ensuring that we are not impeding our progress towards attaining the health-based standards. The main permitting rule that we have that meets those objectives is our new and modified stationary source review NSR rule, which is Rule 2201. It is designed to meet both federal and state NSR requirements and is subject to the most rigorous NSR requirements due to the district's attainment status. Some of the key elements of 2201 include the requirement that most new and modified sources install back, emissions be offset when facility emissions are above certain thresholds. And it's important to clarify here that despite a common misconception, ERCs cannot be used in lieu of meeting other air pollution control requirements, such as through market-based systems that other agencies may have in place. Instead, ERCs are required in addition to and only after all applicable limits and controls are required. A little more context to ERCs. Both federal and state law mandate NSR permitting programs that contain offsetting and ERC banking provisions. ERCs are intended by both federal and state law to be one part of a comprehensive NSR permitting program that has been specifically designed by Congress and the state legislature to allow for industrial growth while tightly regulating any emission increases. And we have historically operated a federal offset equivalency system since some of the requirements for state offsetting are different than federal offsetting requirements. And so we have a program that demonstrated that we have historically been able to satisfy federal offsetting through an equivalent system. And the last key element I want to point out for 2201 is the public notification requirements, which is a period prior to ATC issuance to garner comments on projects that result in emissions above specified levels. And so now I'd like to move on to discuss EPA's recent action on the 2019 version of 2201, EPA's comments and how the district will be addressing those comments. And to give some context here, in August of 2019, the district adopted revisions to Rule 2201 to address minor approvability issues related to the 2016 revisions. These namely were performing an enhanced PM2.5 precursor demonstration for ammonia using new EPA guidance that was published after the rule was adopted in 2016, and amending definitions related to routine replacement emission units and temporary replacement emissions units. In November of 2019, the amended Rule 2201 was submitted to EPA, and then in July of last year, EPA proposed limited disapproval of the 2019 version of Rule 2201. EPA's action identified additional approvability areas which must be addressed during the current Rule 2201 amendment process, which include inclusion of certain federal NSR definitions, inclusion of federal visibility requirements, an analysis of minor source NOx and VOC public notice thresholds, removal of interpollutant offset trading for ozone precursors, revisions to definitions of routine replacement emission unit and temporary replacement emissions unit, federal offset equivalency demonstration, and other minor administrative issues. The comments provided by EPA resulted in various definitions being proposed to be added or revised, and inclusion of the federal visibility provisions from 40 CFR 51.307. The district is proposing various definitions to be revised or added into Section 3 of Rule 2201, which is the definitions section of Rule 2201. I should add that the draft proposed amendments to the rule, those are posted on our website, which includes all of the proposed changes at this time. And some of the definitions that are being revised or added include a simplified and more concise definition of a federal major modification. The requirements and core of the definition will remain the same, but there are some language in the current rule that was considered unnecessary and possibly confusing, so the definition was updated. The major source definition was revised to update a reference to a federal list of sources for which fugitive emissions are included in major source determinations, and also include the federal requirements for handling of emissions from non-road engines in those determinations. The definition of fully offset was revised to include a requirement that for federal offsets, the offsets provided for the full pre-project potential to emit for a unit shall have been provided within the past 5 years and shall have been surplus at that time. The current version of the rule does not contain a definition for a new major source, therefore one has been included. The definition of a complete application was revised to include specific items from 40 CFR 51.160. And there were other definitions that were added and revised that are discussed later in this presentation and are found in the draft rule that was posted on our website. And continuing on with proposed actions to address EPA's action, consistent with the court ruling in the Sierra Club versus EPA, interpollutant offset trading is no longer allowed for ozone precursors for new major sources and federal major mod projects. The district is proposing to include in Section 415 the stack height procedures, provisions and definitions from the Code of Federal Regulations. And the district is also proposing amendments to the federal offset equivalency concepts and public noticing requirements for minor sources, which will be discussed in further detail later in this presentation. For the public notifications for minor sources, the district conducted analysis at the request of EPA that was similar to analysis conducted by other air districts to determine if the current public notice thresholds for minor sources of NOx and VOC are sufficient to only exclude emissions that would not adversely impact the district's attainment status. The analysis compared the emissions from minor sources not subject to public noticing requirements to the actual valley-wide emissions from all sources, and found that the sources not subject to public noticing, the permitted sources that were not subject to public noticing, represented only a small fraction, and those emissions would not adversely impact the district's attainment status. Notwithstanding the results of that analysis, it was appropriate to provide additional opportunity for public comment for sources that are nearing a major source threshold. Therefore, Rule 2201 is being proposed to be amended to add new public noticing requirements for projects exceeding 80% of the major source threshold. We'll turn it over to Brian for a moment.
Okay. Thank you, Jesse. The district is also making amendments to Rule 2201, intended to clarify requirements related to routine maintenance, repair, and replacements, and how they relate to what counts as a modification under Rule 2201. The reason for these amendments is to better define the boundaries between different kinds of replacements in Rule 2201 and ensure they are consistent with federal NSR requirements that would apply to major modifications. The routine replacement emissions unit provision in District Rule 2201 allows the replacement of a whole emissions unit to be exempt from back requirements in the rule, provided the replacement unit meets the qualifying criteria. Federal NSR language does have an exclusion for routine repair, maintenance, and replacement of components by saying these actions are not a physical change or change in the method of operation under federal NSR. But it does not exempt the replacement of an entire emissions unit from federal NSR applicability or requirements. In 2016, the district amended Rule 2201 to exclude federal major modifications from being a routine replacement emissions unit under 2201. However, based on discussions with EPA, there are still portions of the rule where this may not be clear. To ensure the distinction between a routine replacement emission unit and routine maintenance, repair, and replacement in federal NSR is clear throughout the rule, we have amended the definition of routine replacement emission unit in Section 338 to explicitly exclude federal major modifications, and amended the definition of modification in Section 329 to clarify that a federal major modification is also a modification under Rule 2201. The district is also at the recommendation of EPA, including federal visibility requirements into the rule. Section 169A of the Clean Air Act requires the protection of visibility in mandatory Class 1 federal areas. Federal NSR has provisions for implementing visibility protection during pre-construction permitting through both its Prevention of Significant Deterioration, or PSD program, which applies, as many of you know, to federal attainment areas or pollutants. And also those visibility protections provisions are also in the non-attainment NSR portion of federal NSR. Rule 2201, which generally implements the federal non-attainment NSR requirements, does not presently include federal visibility provisions. The district, along with many other California air districts, has instead relied on a federal implementation plan outlined in the CFR, which satisfies this requirement. But as part of EPA's review of the 2019 amendments to District Rule 2201, EPA recommended the district incorporate federal visibility requirements into Rule 2201 instead of relying on the federal implementation plan provisions. The federal visibility protection requirements are described in the implementing regulations 40 CFR 51307. The CFR establishes requirements, I should say the Code of Federal Regulations for CFR, establishes these requirements for state non-attainment NSR programs to provide for the review of federal major modifications and new major sources that may have an impact on visibility in any mandatory Class 1 federal area. Thus, to ensure that the visibility impact provisions are clearly identified as applicable requirements for permit issuance, the district is amending Rule 2201 to include requirements for each federal major modification and new major source to determine the impact to visibility of any mandatory Class area in accordance with the applicable requirements of the CFR, the implementing regulations. These requirements include written notification and consultation with the federal land manager of the affected mandatory Class 1 federal area, potentially monitoring of visibility in the Class 1 area if deemed necessary by the federal land manager after, and then after consultation with the federal land manager, if a project were to have an adverse impact on the visibility of any mandatory Class 1 federal area, that project may be denied. What an adverse impact is defined in the EPA's PSD regulation in Title 40, Part 52.21. To make these assessments in practice, the district is in the process of setting up the procedure recommended in the Federal Land Manager's Air Quality Related Values Work Group, or FLAG report. We expect this not to be although it does create some additional work, but not a burden for the vast majority of projects subject to that are a new major source or federal major modification.
All right, and so I think at this time, we'll go ahead and pause and see if there's any questions at this time. Are there any questions in Fresno in person? All right, would you please come to the podium? Thank you. We do have one question here in Fresno.
I'm from Corcoran, California, and my question has to deal with, could you just explain a little bit where a Class 1 attainment area is in proximity to the air district, well, for Fresno, for instance, and what would be the impacts from a major source modification and how that would be conducted for that?
Yeah, so we have a list here of the most likely affected areas here that are in the sort of within the 100 kilometers of the outer boundary of our jurisdiction. So if you'll bear with me, I can read these areas, but there's immigrant. So let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think about 11, 12. Emigrant Wilderness, Hoover Wilderness, John Muir Wilderness, Kaiser Wilderness, Kings Canyon National Park, and forgive my mispronunciation here, Mokulimi Wilderness, Pinnacles National Monument, San Rafael Wilderness, Sequoia National Park, Ventana Wilderness, Yosemite National Park, and we've included Ansel Adams Wilderness in there as well, although it's kind of questionable whether or not that's a mandatory area, but it's sandwiched in between some areas that clearly are. So the federal land manager is either the Forest Service or the National Park Service there for each of those, and we expect there'll be sort of a central contact for each of those. So we won't need to, we'll do our analysis and we'll be able to contact either. Well, we'll end up probably contacting both the Forest Service and the National Park Service. Potentially, what is it? Fish and Game as well. They may be included in that notification. But in terms of how we expect most of this to be conducted, there's a procedure for at least any new major source or major modification that's greater than 50 kilometers. The FLAG, the guidance document published by the federal land managers for this kind of analysis allows a screening out of projects that have what they call a Q over D value of less than 10. The Q is the tons per year increase of the project. And that's all visibility affecting pollutants, so PM10, PM2.5, SOx, NOx, and sulfuric acid mist. Those are the pollutants that would be added up to determine the Q and the Q over 10 in tons per year. And then the Q over D, so it's Q over D, that ratio. The D is the kilometers of the project from the class 1 area, the mandated, I have to say that right, there's 4 words here, mandatory class 1 federal area. So what we found is, or what, at least in the flag manual, what's, the ratio of anything more than 10 might be subject to additional or more refined modeling analysis. But when you think of that ratio and the types of projects we typically see that trigger a federal major modification in San Joaquin, because we're extreme non-attainment and the thresholds are so low, we expect the majority of projects to be screened out with that Q over D ratio. But this is all conducted in consultation with the federal land manager. So did that? Okay.
Any questions on Zoom? Okay. Any questions in Modesto?
We have no members of the public in Modesto.
Thank you. Any questions in Bakersfield?
Yes, we have a question in Bakersfield. Let's do over here.
Okay. Am I getting green lights? Am I getting green lights? There we go. Hi, I'm Lance Erickson. I am Health, Safety and Environmental Specialist with Chevron. A couple of people up on the panel today are ones I've talked with, but I don't know if I've ever seen them on the screen or not. So it's nice to meet you. I want to thank you for having the workshop here where you could come in person. I find it a lot easier to make sort of these comments and think of things as they go along. I appreciate what you said on the visibility analysis, that you are going to have a screening, because it is clearly if you're a long distance away from a class 1 area, don't have too many emissions, you're not going to likely to be a issue with visibility. Are you going to? My question, I guess, is: are you going to be putting that together as a guideline document of some kind, so that if we're applying, we can either have our consultant look into that, or look into it ourselves as far as the level of modeling that might be required?
Yes, we're working on a guideline or policy right now, in fact, and then we're doing this in concert with the federal land manager. So, yeah, we expect to have that in a usable form here, before we adopt the rules, certainly.
And I just have one more follow up on that, because you are required or are going to be requiring consultation with the federal land managers. Not to say that the federal government doesn't always move at a rapid pace, but is there something that we'd have as a backup? Because I don't know if these provisions would stay the mandatory timelines for issuance of permits or denial of permits.
Right. So I think, yeah, and we have to work that out to be sure, but I think the initial thought was to, they would have at least for projects that we think would be screened out when we notify them initially, and we probably something like that could take place during the preliminary review. We're supposed to notify them within 30 days, I believe, of the receipt of an application. And so the idea would be to notify them, to provide kind of a project summary. And if we think the project screens out based on that Q over D criteria, then we would give them, a certain amount of time. I mean, obviously we're working with them cooperatively, but the idea would be maybe a 30-day window for them to concur.
45 potentially.
Or 45 potentially, to get and maybe have an agreement. We're trying to streamline the process. So have something where a non-response can be taken as a tacit concurrence with our conclusion. I mean, that would be our hope, that we don't need a affirmative response for these projects that would be screened out. So yes, in order to avoid that situation that you mentioned of it.
Yeah. Hey, Lance, this is Errol. We absolutely agree with your sentiment that there needs to be timelines that are built into our procedures, and we're working to establish those so that way projects don't just get held up based on inaction. But we're definitely working on that.
And of course, we'd be perfectly willing to work with you on this. It's an important issue, visibility in the class 1 areas, national parks basically, and wilderness areas. And as long as we know what those guidelines are and how the process works, we'll certainly be glad to work within those guidelines. So thanks for coming, thinking through the details and coming up with a well-developed program.
Great. Yeah, we definitely look forward to working with the stakeholders as we implement these new guidelines hopefully again in an expedited or in a methodical fashion.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for those questions. And then next, we'll go ahead and move into the topic that we've just discussed before, a multi-path approach for offsetting requirements. So since the district has been reclassified to extreme non-attainment for ozone, programmatically, the federal NSR offsetting requirements are at least as stringent as the district Rule 2201 offsetting requirements. Therefore, for new major sources and federal major mods for NOx and VOC, the district is proposing to integrate the federal offsetting requirements on a project level into Section 4.8 of the rule. In the proposed Section 4.8.4, the district will require the federal offset quantity, or the FOQ, for these types of projects, and the FOQ must be satisfied with ERCs that are surplus at time of use. The FOQ is determined as the difference between the post-project potential to emit and the federal baseline emissions, which is a new definition that has been added to the rule, where it is actual emissions, unless if a unit is highly utilized or fully offset. Additionally, an offset ratio of 1.3 to 1 can be used for internal emission reductions. And consistent with the Clean Air Act, the district is proposing an exemption from the federal offset quantity for rule compliance projects that meet certain criteria. Additionally, in sections 4.8.1 and 4.8.3, the district is proposing administrative requirements such as the timing of when the offsets shall be provided and the provisions to use internal emission reductions. Because of these new requirements proposed to be added to the rule, new major sources and federal major mod projects for NOx and VOC are exempt from the district offset quantity requirements, so as to not require double mitigation of a single increase, since the federal offset requirements are programmatically more stringent. For ATC projects that are not new major sources or federal major mods for NOx and VOC emissions, there are no proposed changes to the requirements of the current rule. We are proposing to require in section 4.7 the district offset quantity, or DOQ. This term DOQ has been used in discussions in the past, but is being proposed to be officially included in the rule language. And the DOQ, the district offset quantity, may continue to be satisfied with ERCs that are valued at time of banking or issuance. And this is consistent with state law and historic California Air District practice. The other part of the multi-path approach for PM10, PM2.5, SOx, and CO is a little more straightforward in that it follows the district's current offsetting procedures, and the district will continue to maintain a system to demonstrate equivalency with the federal offsetting requirements. For all ATC projects, the district would require the DOQ, and the DOQ may be satisfied with any valid ERC. Once again, this is consistent with state law and historic California Air District practice. This path for these pollutants is still appropriate because programmatically the Rule 2201 offsetting requirements are more stringent than federal NSR offsetting requirements. And as such, the district will continue to track and include these pollutants in federal offset equivalency system to ensure that our requirements are at least as stringent as the federal program. Therefore, the offsetting requirements for these pollutants are not expected to change.
Okay, thanks, Jesse. Now I'll go over some amendments to the federal offset equivalency tracking system we're proposing. So as a result of the districts being unable to continue to show federal offset of equivalency for NOx and VOC, the district is amending its equivalency tracking system. Tracking of NOx and VOC is no longer necessary because the district will be implementing full federal offsetting requirements for new major sources and federal major modifications for NOx and VOC. PM10, PM2.5, SOx, and CO will remain in the tracking system since to date the district is still showing equivalency with these pollutants. The district is also amending the rule to go from a two-test demonstration for equivalency in the current rule to a single test. The two-test demonstration currently consists of an offset quantity test and a surplus value test. Each test has its own remedy for a failure to show equivalency, and one of the remedies allows for implementation of a kind of hybrid of the district federal requirements. This approach was devised together with US EPA back in the early 2000s. Nevertheless, both the district and EPA agree that going forward, a single test approach is both more representative of federal offset equivalency and is less liable to potential interpretive confusion over whether or not the offset system is equivalent or not when a remedy is implemented. The proposed single test will resemble the current surplus value test. Also, to address EPA comments on the demonstration, the other proposed change to the equivalency system is that the district will transition from a programmatic annual demonstration to a programmatic permit level or time of ATC issuance demonstration. The current system determines equivalency once per year. The demonstration has a programmatic annual true-up performed after the end of each tracking period. When the federal offset quantity for every project from the tracking period from August 20th of the previous year to August 19th of the current year are totaled up and compared to the total district offset quantity, if we're talking about the offset quantity test, or for the surplus value test, it's compared to the district must show that it has collected enough surplus adjusted credible emission reductions from the tracking system to match the federal offset quantity. The issue here is that a permanent or irreversible shortfall in the equivalency system is not determined until the annual true-up analysis. This lag between a shortfall and the true-up, and most importantly, a lag between an equivalency failure and implementation of the remedy creates a problem. Where there's a failure is certain, this lag creates the potential for the Rule 2201 offset system to operate at a deficit for many months compared to the federal offset requirements. In other words, the district could continue to issue ATCs under a system that programmatically is not requiring enough offsets for the issued projects that are new major sources and federal major modifications. Therefore, in place of the annual demonstration, the district is proposing a programmatic permit level demonstration for each ATC project that is a new major source or federal major modification for the pollutants that are still in equivalency. The proposed programmatic permit level demonstration would not allow the equivalency demonstration to operate at a deficit, since ongoing real-time program-wide equivalency will be determined for each project. So what would be the same under this proposal? Well, there's no change to the key concepts, the calculations, definitions, and practice, federal offset quantity, district offset quantity, surplus at time of use. Those will be the same. And the district will continue to make up any project shortfalls using extra creditable emission reductions from the carryover balance in the tracking system. The district is still collecting extra emission reductions from these pollutants and using them for equivalency. So what would be different under the proposed permit level demonstration? Well, each ATC project that is a new major source or federal major modification will have to demonstrate equivalency before the district can proceed with a preliminary decision to approve the ATCs. This would allow for no potential operation at a deficit or lag between an equivalency failure and the remedy. The remedy is that the project cannot go forward until equivalency can be demonstrated. A failure then really is never triggered. The demonstration will be included also as part of the ATC application review, which is already subject to EPA CARB and public review. So then instead of doing the demonstration at the end of the year once, the district will do it in each project. We don't expect, or we haven't had very many, for the pollutants that are left in equivalency, we've had very few major modifications for those pollutants in the last decade. The other difference would be that the annual equivalence report will just now be a summary of the previous year's projects and updates to the carryover balances for each pollutant. And it will not be the focus of the equivalency demonstration anymore. So we're at a pause here and ask or see if there's any questions you have based on the previous slides.
Sorry, Dennis, the microphones just won't capture you in the audience, so it's easier for us to record your comment.
Thank you. Now I forgot my question. Oh, okay. All right, do that.
Lance, Dennis is trying to remember his question. If you want to go ahead and ask yours. Oh, can you unmute? Yeah, thank you.
There, no, I be right. Okay, I should know this after going to variance hearings. It's been a while since I've had to do one of those. Thank you for the description. For a while, my head was spinning there, though, even mine, which I can track these pretty carefully. But when you got down to the fact that this is for new major for the non-VOC and non-NOx emissions, the tracking is really addressing new major stationary sources or federal major modifications for those pollutants that are not NOx or VOC. I didn't get them written down, but PMs and SOx, et cetera. So that's correct. So we'll still be doing tracking, but you'll be doing tracking on a project by project basis as well to make sure that you don't have a project that might throw you out of equivalency by the end of the year. So yes. Once I got that in my head, I think the changes make perfect sense. You don't want to get caught at the end of the year without enough credits. I had some specific questions on, and they're really just kind of minor clarifications. In section 4.8 in 2201 in the rule, we're talking about 4.8.1.3.1, The shutdown or curtailment occurred after the baseline year for the attainment plan for that pollutant. What year is that? And specifically for the ozone plan or the that we used as a baseline.
Yeah, so that would be 2017 for the ozone plan that we have.
Okay, and then it goes on to say if the projected emission, you can use them if they occurred prior to 2017, if the attainment plan explicitly includes emissions from the shutdown or curtailed emissions unit. And I know we had this discussion a number of years ago, and my understanding was the district was going to include the banked credits in their planning process. But how do I know if I have a banked credit, and it's probably before 2017, if that's explicitly included? And maybe what I have to take up with Aaron on a one-on-one.
Yeah, my understanding is that they're all included, the entire bank is included, but the district is still subject to these caps, the pre-baseline ERC caps. So that, but they're all included, you know, up until the cap might apply.
And that's kind of what I thought, that we'd gone through this a couple of years ago and that they were going to be explicitly included. But when I saw that word explicitly, I was a little concerned. But it sounds like that's the intent is they are explicitly included for planning purposes. So I'll check on. I have a project coming up, and it may be after this is adopted. We'll talk more on a one-on-one basis. I just had, and one thing that as I was reading through this, it talks about the curtailment or shutdown of an existing emissions unit. And my recollection of the federal requirements, and this is under a federal program, is they rarely talk about emissions units. They talk about stationary sources. Was there a reason, or was that just that we use that? And my recollection may not be correct, but it seemed like that requirement for limiting shutdown credits was based on the shutdown or curtailments of stationary sources, not individual pieces of equipment. And again, that's one I may have to talk to you guys outside of the room on that one, because that's just getting into the weeds.
Yeah, I don't recall the federal requirements to be only stationary sources, but we can definitely talk offline and kind of make sure that we're understanding that properly.
Yeah. At one time, I always used to like federals because they were always, everything was lumped together in the stationary source, and you did your stationary source calculations. So it had a different flavor. It's a little easier to do it on a unit by unit basis, but it would make a difference. In the credits I've got, I don't think it makes a difference because they were for the shutdown of a stationary source anyway. So they would probably have to be included under the OR provision under 48132. Thanks. I'll talk to you guys more on the details.
Sounds great. Thanks, Lance.
And I hope Dennis has thought of his question now.
Yes, I have. Now, excuse me for that. I just had a mind freeze when I came up here. But the issue goes to the time involved to determine the offset equivalency for an authority to construct. If you have a procedure for that, will CAPS be able to make that determination for applications that they are, CAPS being a certified air permitting professional, for applications that are submitted as part of a submittal to the air district?
As far as the certified air permitting professionals, that would be, I guess, a requirement that we would want to see as a part of the application review submittal. Because of the expedited processing associated with formal CAP submittals, it should include all analyses, including the federal major mod determinations, the district offset quantity, federal offset quantities. And we can go into specifics and help kind of provide guidance and share policies on how those calculations are performed. but we would expect a complete application package, including all of those individual pieces and calculations.
I asked the question specifically because the baseline emissions that you're drawing from would only be known by the air district.
Well, so the baseline emissions calculations would be based on historical actual emissions.
No, we're not on the same page, and I'm not explaining this correctly.
Reduction project.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Where I'm coming from is that when you're doing the offset equivalency on a programmatic level, how is our project going to be compared to that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess my perspective would be the amount of offsets calculated. The district would perform that portion of the analysis. I apologize. We would do the equivalency tracking as a part of our portion, and that wouldn't be submitted by the CAP applicants. You're correct.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Did we have any online? No. Okay, I don't see anything on our webcast, so we'll go ahead and keep moving forward, but thank you for the comments.
Now we're going to discuss the proposed amendments to Rule 2301, Emission Reduction Credit Banking. If you've been tuning into our previous workshops, this following slide should be fairly familiar to you. The district is proposing to amend the definition of, among the proposed amendments, the district is proposing to amend the definition of timeliness, ERC application timeliness, with a focus on the definition of shutdown and how it affects application timeliness. These amendments are meant to clarify and affirm historical practice. The district is also proposing to discontinue new banking of greenhouse gas reductions. We are proposing also to add amendments to formalize the banking of what we're calling unbanked shutdown emission reductions. And then there's also some miscellaneous rule clarifications. So to treat these in a bit more detail, with regard to ERC application timeliness, this was noted in the CARB program review, and specifically the key concern there was the definition of shutdown. The proposed amendments will amend the definition of shutdown according to the language from District Policy 1805, Policy on the Interpretation of the Definition of Shutdown from 1992. This amendment will thus maintain consistency with district historic practice and remove the ambiguous language in the current definition. The proposed amendments will also add language to clarify the meaning of date of emission reduction in the application procedures and make ERC application timeliness language in Section 5.5 consistent with the ERC application timeliness eligibility criteria in Section 423. The proposed changes are meant to improve the consistency and clarity of the rule language and not intended to be a departure from historic practice. The district is also proposing to discontinue new banking of greenhouse gas ERCs. Greenhouse gas banking was originally adopted in 2012 to accommodate the request of stakeholders. However, since then, many alternative greenhouse gas banking options have developed. Moreover, district-issued GHG ERCs are not used, and regulation of greenhouse gases is not central to the district's mission. So we've proposed amendments to remove the sections listed there, and retaining other sections that do mention greenhouse gases because we feel these are still necessary for the processing of greenhouse gas transfers, which we will still be conducting that part of the banking for GHG certificates. Finally, let's see. Oops. Am I in the right one? Yeah. Sorry. That's the other. Okay. So other amendments to Rule 2301 include adding actual, or the abbreviation actual emission reductions, since that abbreviation is used in the rule but not defined as such, including the term or the abbreviation AER in the definition of offset to match the definition in Rule 2201, and then clarifying prohibited emission reductions from power plants. In other words, there's a type of emission reduction that cannot be banked there. And then clarifying when surplus adjusting of ERCs may be performed. So these are minor other changes to the rule that we'll be doing. Are there any questions on this? Hmm?
There we go. Lance Erickson, Chevron again. Just as it relates to ERC banking, 2201 requires air quality improvement deduction. I think that's in section 4.12.1 of 10%. And my understanding, part of that was used in the equivalency program. And since NOx and VOC are not going to be in the equivalency program, and that air quality improvement deduction is not a federal requirement, I'd wondered if you were going to had considered making a change to that so that those VOC and NOx credits could be banked and used under the programs that are elsewhere in the rule, because it doesn't seem like it's going to be used for anything else anymore.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lance. We are still looking into the usage of the other types of emissions reductions, the air quality improvement deductions, even establishing use for the new proposed unbanked shutdown emissions reductions. That hasn't been fully vetted just yet. We're looking at those opportunities, whether or not there is going to be a new potential, I don't know, internal bank that we can utilize to help with some of the offsetting issues associated with implementing a federal program. We're looking at different ways of having to or how to do that. I know there are other agencies that have a bank specifically for essential public services, things like that. So we're evaluating options. There's no proposal to remove the air quality improvement deduction requirement from 2201 just yet. But again, we'll be evaluating all of that as we keep moving forward with identifying other opportunities for additional ERC generation in order to help with additional project offsetting requirements because of the federal system.
Yeah, and I would say that would just be for future banking actions, not obviously anything that's occurred in the past. But if it's not being used, the ability to the necessity to provide offsets will remain in the rule, but with the surplus at time of use requirements, the availability of credits for use by, to be purchased on the open market is very limited. So if that change could be considered, I think it would make the program much more workable, and you would avoid the problem of running out of credits that it can be used under the program as it's designed in the rule. So I'd like to consider that, looking into changing that for NOx and VOC and not taking 10% of the future actions for programs that aren't well defined at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that comment, and we'll definitely make that consideration. The one thing to note is I know historically, even just more recently, we haven't seen very many banking actions, but every little bit helps. So we understand your position, and we'll definitely put that into consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, so no comments online. I don't see anything here in the central region. We'll go ahead and just move on.
So next we'll move on to the proposed amendments to the district's rule 1020, which is our definitions rule. So per EPA comment, the district is proposing to amend rule 1020 to update the VOC definition to exclude several new negligible photochemically reactive compounds, which is consistent with 40 CFR 51.100. The district is proposing to move the PM 2.5 definition from Rule 2201 to Rule 1020 for consistency and location of definitions. And then lastly, we are updating the PM 10 definition to include condensables, which is consistent with the other PM definitions and historic district practice in regulating PM 10. So hopefully some pretty straightforward changes there. And with that, that concludes our information we're presenting today. The next steps for public engagement, the public comment period, we'll be taking public comments through March 1st, and then publication of the proposed rule package in March 21st, with the governing board public hearing proposed for April 20th.
I did want to clarify that this is, we understand that this is an aggressive time frame, and we do hope to address any comments received during this public comment period. And so we definitely hope to receive comments and work with any interested stakeholders through this time frame. Of course, if we receive significant comments that may allow or may require a change in our direction, we'll adjust the April governing board hearing accordingly. But this is our tentative timelines, and we hope to be able to meet these timelines for a April hearing. So we have Jesse Garcia's contact information for any of these public comments. You can send it directly to his email address, jesse@valleyair.org, or you can send it in written comments or hard copy comments to our district address at 1990 East Gettysburg. Again, the comment period for this workshop is ending March 1st, so a 2-week period to receive comments, and throughout the rule development process up until our governing board hearing, we are, again, you are able to make comments on our proposed rules and any documents that we have for publication. So formally, we'll go ahead and now open up the final portion of the workshop for any additional comments or questions regarding all of the items that we discussed this evening. We can start with the webcast.
I have Mike Kelly.
So this is Mike Kelly with Vector Environmental, and I just have one comment, which is really a point of clarification. But with respect to the use of shutdown credits, the credits only have to be included in the projected emissions inventory for the attainment plan, which would include the projected emissions inventory for the most recent attainment plan for the 2022 plan for the 2015 ozone standard. And the section that is in the district's rules is basically identical to the information contained in 40 CFR 51.165. So as long as the emission reduction credits are included in the projected emissions inventory, just like Brian had noted, and then they're identified, they're allowed to be used, and then they are capped by the ERC cap that the district has included for the growth for the baseline, for the pre-baseline credits. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Mike. Any other comments, Katrina? Okay. So seeing no other comments via Zoom, I don't think there's any comments via the teleconference. I am looking at our webcast at valleyair.org and don't see any comments. I don't see Lance or the Central Region attendees with any comments. So with that, I will go ahead and adjourn our meeting. Thank you again for joining us. I did want to remind everybody we hope to receive comments for this workshop and the published documents by March 1st. And again, please contact Jesse Garcia, myself, or Brian Clerico if you have any additional comments or questions or would like to talk offline. I appreciate everybody attending tonight and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.